All right, so there's a number of ways to look at this. It's asking you what is the fraction that lies halfway between these two fractions right here. We have a number line that actually goes on in both directions. And let's just make that 0 and this 1. So this first number is 2/3. To do that, we have to divide the number line into thirds. This would be 1/3. This would be 2/3. And of course this would be 3/3, which is the same as 1. And then the second fraction, which is 3/4. So now, the same kind of problem I showed you in the intro here, we now are dividing things on a different number basis. So that would be a half or 2/4. And this would be 1/4. So this gives you a good example of one of the issues I was talking about before. We now want to plot this 3/4 number, this fraction right here, 3/4. Where do I plot it? Do I put it to the left of 2/3? Is it less than 2/3 or greater than 2/3? Just for our purposes of visualizing this, how do we know? Well, if you convert these in your head to decimals, it becomes much easier. 2/3 as a decimal equals 0.666, and it repeats. So that's 66 over 100, 66 hundredths, or 666 over 1,000, or on and on. 3/4, if you divide 4 into 3, you get 0.75. So now it's much easier to compare 0.75 to 0.666. 0.75 is larger, so we would know that our 3/4 number is larger, so it goes there. So this demonstrates layer upon layer of the issues that come up when you're trying to compare fractions that aren't similar. So now we have this 2/3 point and we have a 3/4 point. And this is asking, what is the fraction that lies exactly halfway between? So if we were to blow this section of the ruler up, it would look something like this. Here's our 2/3 mark, and here's our 3/4 mark. Now these are actually 2 points in space represented by numbers, and they want to know what number represents the midway point. What is halfway between those two? That's our task. And there's a number of ways to go about doing this. Visually, you could measure this distance and then divide it by 2. So you could do 2/3 minus 3/4 divide by 2, and that would tell you the amount of distance to either add on to the smaller, the 2/3 number, or you could take the halfway amount and subtract it from 3/4. Now it's kind of involved, but that would work. Figure out what half the distance amount is, add it to this number, and it would take you there. Start at the 3/4, subtract the halfway, and it would take you to the midpoint. That's a viable way to do it. You could also do this as a decimal, which is a very good way to do it. You're at 2/3. Make that into a decimal. That's 0.666. Your other point is 3/4. Turn that into a decimal. That's 0.75. And you could do the same thing that I talked about right here. Find the delta, the difference between those two, 0.75 minus 0.666. 6. We'll turn it into a 7, for rough estimation. So 75 minus 67 would be 0.08, half of 0.08. So 0.08 divided by 2 equals 0.04. So that is the length of 1/2 of the delta. So we would add 0.04 to 0.666 plus 0.04. So that would be 6, 10, 7, 0.706. But what is that in a fraction? We could also start at 0.75 and subtract 0.04, and that takes us to 0.71, which is the functional equivalent. If we round, that 6 turns that into a 1. So really both of them are 0.71 is the halfway mark. But what is 0.71 in terms of fractions? Because over here on our answer choices we don't have any that are in decimal. If you had a calculator that allowed you to change decimals into fraction, you could just hit the frac button and it would turn this into a fraction. You could also, we'll just make this easy, you could also start either the top or the bottom and calculate what these answer choices are in fraction or in decimals. So you just divide 24 into 17 and that equals 0.708, and that 8 would round this up to 0.71, and we can see that that's the correct answer. That's one way to do it. I think the easiest and fastest way to answer this question is to simply recognize that what they are asking is to find the midway point between these two numbers. And the way you find a midway point between the two numbers is you add them together and divide by 2. So, for example, if we were given a 5 and a 10 and asked what is the midway point, or what is exactly halfway between those two, it's the midway point. So visually, you have a number line, there's 5 and there's 10. What is this point halfway between? You simply add the two together, 5 plus 10, and you divide by 2. That's 15 divided by 2, which is 7.5. And 7.5 is this halfway point. So we can do the exact same thing with this fraction. We're given 2/3. We add it to the other fraction, 3/4. And we divide the whole thing by 2, and that will tell us exactly the midpoint. In order to add these two fractions together, we have to create a common denominator. You can find it by just multiplying the two denominators together, and in this case that works. 4 times 3 is 12. That is the lowest common denominator, so we'll use that. In order to model 3/4 up to a denominator of 12, you have to multiply top and bottom by 3/3, which is just 1. So that becomes 3 times 3 is 9 over 12. On this side, we have to multiply top and bottom by 4. 4/4 is just 1, so it doesn't change the value. 4 times 2 is 8 over 12. So there are our two numbers, 8 over 12 plus 9 over 12, the entire thing divided by 2, and that will give us the final result. 9 plus 8 is 17 over 12 divided by 2. Dividing by 2 is the same as multiplying by 1/2, so we have 17 over 12 times 1/2. And that equals 17 over 24. Ta-da! I think that's the fastest way to do this. and there's your answer choice.